I had been dreaming about this car for as long as I could remember, sketching it in notebooks, imagining every curve, every detail, every color. Months of working extra shifts, skipping nights out, and carefully budgeting every paycheck finally paid off. When I handed over the last payment, I felt a surge of pride that I hadn't felt in a long time. This was mine, every inch of it, a symbol of my hard work and persistence. Driving out of the dealership, the leather smell and the hum of the engine under my fingers made my heart race. I couldn't wait to show my parents, imagining their faces lighting up, maybe even a small compliment or proud smile. But the first words out of my mother's mouth were not praise. She remarked how nice it would look for my sister, glancing at her as if she had ownership over my triumph. My father's nod was barely noticeable, a casual acknowledgement that felt more like an afterthought than recognition. The sting of disappointment crept in as I realized the subtle favoritism had already started, weaving tension into what should have been a moment of pure joy. Even as I parked in the driveway, I felt the weight of unspoken comparisons, the invisible scoreboard of who mattered more, who deserved attention, and who was being passed over. For the first time, the excitement of my accomplishment was clouded by a sense of unease, a realization that my family's support might never align with my hard work. The smell of the new car that once filled me with triumph now carried a whisper of betrayal, reminding me that nothing I owned, no matter how earned, could escape the shadow of their bias. I stepped out of the car, heart pounding, attempting to mask the hurt behind a practiced smile, knowing that this was only the beginning of a story I hadn't yet imagined. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. My sister, usually indifferent to most of my things, suddenly became intensely interested in my car. She lingered by every chance she got, running her fingers along the hood, peering inside, and making casual comments that made my stomach twist. "I've always deserved something like this more than you," she joked one evening, her smirk masking something sharper, like she believed it. I laughed awkwardly, unsure if she was teasing or testing boundaries, but a cold knot of unease settled in my chest. Worse, my parents barely noticed my excitement. Instead, they chimed in with comments that highlighted her, praising her taste, her style, her sense of what I had bought. Every compliment that wasn't mine felt like a tiny cut, a reminder that their eyes and pride were reserved for her. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was harmless, but the tension kept simmering. I caught myself watching their interactions, noticing the subtle nods and smells meant only for her, the way I was consistently overlooked. Anger started to mix with confusion, a bitter realization that perhaps my effort, my hard work, wasn't enough to earn acknowledgement in my own family. I questioned everything I thought I knew about them, wondering if their love and support had always been conditional, and if I was simply expected to take my place in the background while my sister basked in the spotlight. Even small jokes that once felt innocent now seemed loaded with judgment, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my triumph was already being stolen before it had truly begun. I woke up that morning with a strange sense of anticipation, thinking about taking my car out for a long drive, maybe finally treating myself after weeks of saving and waiting. But as I stepped outside, the driveway was empty. My stomach dropped, a cold pit opening in my chest as I scanned the street, hoping maybe I had parked it wrong or that it had been moved by some well-meaning neighbor. But no, it was gone. Every instinct screamed at me, and panic quickly gave way to disbelief. I ran back inside, searching frantically for my parents, my voice trembling as I demanded to know where my car was. They exchanged casual glances, like this was some trivial matter. My father shrugged and said, "Oh, we borrowed it for your sister today. She needed it." My mother nodded, as if handing over my car was the most natural thing in the world. I felt my knees weaken, a flush of humiliation and anger spreading through me. Neighbors who had come out to see me off that morning now peeked from behind their curtains, their curiosity turning into awkward stares. Friends who had promised to meet me for a quick spin around town arrived just in time to witness the confrontation, their eyes wide with disbelief as I stood frozen, struggling to process their audacity. I opened my mouth, but words failed me for a long moment. The betrayal was too raw, too immediate. My car, the tangible proof of my hard work, my pride, had been taken without permission, handed to someone else as if my feelings didn't matter at all. The mix of shock, anger, and embarrassment hit like a tidal wave, leaving me reeling as the reality sank in. This was not a minor oversight or harmless prank. This was deliberate favoritism, a blatant disregard for my autonomy. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of how unfairly I had been treated all these years. The humiliation burned even more sharply knowing everyone around me had seen it, and my parents' casual, almost gleeful demeanor made it impossible to ignore how little they value my effort, my time, and my accomplishments. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, convincing myself that staying calm would get my point across. "This isn't okay," I said, evenly, carefully choosing my words, hoping logic would pierce through their casual indifference. But they laughed. My mother waved it off with a dismissive smile, and my father chuckled, as if I were overreacting to something trivial. The sound of their amusement hit me harder than any insult, and I felt my chest tighten. A mix of disbelief and rising frustration I could no longer ignore. Memories began flooding and every birthday ignored, every achievement downplayed. Every time my voice was silenced, will they praise my sister for the smallest things? This wasn't isolated. It was a pattern, a relentless reinforcement of favoritism that had shaped my entire life. Anger began simmering beneath the surface, but I forced myself to swallow it, reminding myself I had to be rational, at least for now. Still, a part of me burned with the injustice of it all. A quiet rage that whispered I couldn't keep pretending it didn't hurt. The humiliation lingered, a shadow over every attempt I made to reason with them, and I realized that controlling my anger wouldn't erase the truth. I had been undervalued, overlooked, and dismissed for far too long. The more I replayed these moments in my mind, the clearer it became that this incident was only the latest proof that my parents had no intention of acknowledging my worth. And as their laughter echoed in my ears, a slow, dangerous resolve began to take shape. Anger I refused to deny anymore. A quiet, but burning determination to reclaim what was mine, no matter the cost. For a long while, I considered letting it go, telling myself that keeping the peace was more important than making a scene. I could have smiled, nodded, and pretended that the theft of my car didn't matter, convincing myself that family was more important than my pride. But each passing minute made that idea feel smaller, weaker, almost laughable. The humiliation I felt standing there while my parents treated my accomplishment as their property, flaunting favoritism in front of the neighbors, was unbearable. Every instinct screamed that I couldn't stay silent. The thought of letting them continue to see me as the lesser child, the one whose hard work didn't count, was infuriating. FOMO weighed heavily too. I realized that if I didn't act, I would be left behind, sidelined, dismissed yet again. My mind raced through options, and the idea that had felt absurd at first began to feel like the only path to reclaiming my dignity. Calling 911, pressing charges, taking a stand that they couldn't ignore. The thought of involving authorities felt like a thunderclap, shocking and thrilling at the same time. It wasn't just about the car anymore, it was about respect, acknowledgement, and finally proving that I wouldn't tolerate being overlooked. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of real power, a clarity that surged through me, replacing the helplessness with a fierce determination. I would fight, and this time, I would ensure that no one could question my worth or dismiss my effort ever again. I spent the next day meticulously documenting everything, knowing that words alone wouldn't be enough to prove what had happened. I screenshot messages where my sister hinted she needed the car, dug up social media posts where my parents subtly praised her while ignoring my efforts, and even noted the exact times the car had been moved without my permission. Every little detail mattered. Every small proof building a case I could no longer ignore. As I went through these records, memories surfaced like sharp little knives. Times I had tried to voice my feelings and been dismissed. "You're overreacting," my mother had said once, brushing off my disappointment. "It's just a car," my father had added, as if minimizing my hard work would somehow erase the hurt. Those moments, once fleetingly painful, now carried weight, reinforcing that this wasn't just about a single incident, it was a pattern. My hand shook as I made calls to friends who had witnessed the events, asking them to confirm what they had seen. Their hesitant agreement both comforting and chilling, because it underscored the reality that I would have to confront this head-on. Suspense crawled in my chest as I weighed my next step: confront them publicly and risk humiliation, or involve the authorities and escalate matters legally. Every choice carried consequences, and I realized that whichever path I took, the family dynamic I had known for years would shatter. But beneath the anxiety, there was a flicker of exhilaration, the thrill of finally taking control, of assembling proof that would make them answer for their actions. By the time I finished, I had a dossier that was undeniable, a silent weapon that gave me a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. I took a deep breath and walked into the living room, my hands trembling slightly, though I tried to appear composed. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm, the words carrying more weight than they probably expected. I laid everything out: the car, their favoritism, the countless times my effort had been dismissed or minimized. I told them how it made me feel invisible, and valued, and disrespected, each word fueled by months of suppressed anger and humiliation. My parents exchanged glances, and for a brief moment, I thought they might actually listen. But that hope vanished almost instantly. My mother rolled her eyes, muttering something about me being dramatic, and my father shrugged, as if my words were nothing more than background noise. Frustration surged through me, hotter and more urgent than I had anticipated. I refused to be ignored any longer. "You know," I added carefully, letting the silence stretch, "I've been documenting everything. I've thought long and hard about my next step." Their faces shifted subtly: curiosity, then unease, but I didn't give them any comfort. I let them feel the tension I had carried for so long, the power that had been buried under years of their favoritism and neglect. The mere hint that I might involve authorities hit them like a lightning bolt, their casual dismissal faltering as I maintained steady eye contact. I felt a rush of adrenaline, a fierce clarity washing over me, knowing that for the first time, they could not simply laugh off my anger. The room, once weighted with my frustration and their indifference, now hummed with a new dynamic. I was no longer powerless, and they were beginning to realize it. For the first time, I wasn't pleading, I wasn't begging, I wasn't minimizing my own feelings, I was asserting my worth. And the tension between us crackled like electricity, ready to ignite the next stage of confrontation. My hand shook as I picked up the phone, dialing 911 with a mix of fear, adrenaline, and a strange sense of empowerment. Every ring felt like a countdown to reclaiming control. And when the operator answered, my voice trembled at first. "Yes, my parents. They took my car without permission. I want to report it," I said, each word tasting like both liberation and confrontation. As I explained the situation, listing details and evidence, a part of me worried about the fallout neighbors, friends, even extended family would find out. But another part, a louder, more insistent part, surged with satisfaction. Finally, someone was listening. Someone official who couldn't be swayed by my parents' casual dismissal. I imagined their faces as the call progressed, the realization that their control over the situation was slipping, and it thrilled me. Vulnerability and strength collided within me, a dizzying cocktail of fear, righteousness, and anticipation. By the time I hung up, I felt a shift, like a tide turning in my favor. The power balance had changed. They were no longer untouchable, and I had finally drawn a line they couldn't ignore. My parents' earlier smirks and dismissive glances now seemed fragile, and for the first time, I felt the weight of empowerment as adrenaline coursed through me, confirming that standing up for myself could actually yield results. I took a deep breath, heart racing, realizing that this call wasn't just about a car wreck, it was a declaration. I would not be ignored, dismissed, or silenced again. The sound of sirens outside made my stomach twist. a mix of anxiety and anticipation. When the police arrived, I felt a strange surge of power finally, authority on my side. My parents stepped outside, their usual arrogance faltering as the officers approached, eyes narrowing as they realized this was serious. I stayed back, calm and composed, letting the tension build, watching as their confident postures wavered. One officer asked for my statement, and I recounted every detail: the theft, their favoritism, the repeated dismissals of my feelings. Witnesses, neighbors, and friends I had contacted earlier stepped forward, confirming everything I had documented. My parents tried to speak, to offer explanations, but their words stumbled, excuses falling flat under the weight of evidence. "It's just a misunderstanding," my mother stammered, voice tight, while my father's attempts at charm dissolved into defensive muttering. Each failed justification widened the chasm between their self-perception and the reality staring back at them. I felt a fierce sense of vindication, a quiet thrill as the tables turned. The power had shifted. The family hierarchy I had been forced to accept for years was crumbling in real time. Every nod from the officers, every acknowledgement of my evidence, solidified that I was finally being heard, that their control was slipping. As the scene unfolded, a mixture of satisfaction, relief, and adrenaline pulsed through me. I realized that this moment was more than just about a car. It was a reckoning, a public validation that their favoritism and disregard could no longer go unchallenged. The weight of months of frustration, humiliation, and anger seemed to lift slightly, replaced by the intoxicating knowledge that I was reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my power, step by step. Right there in the driveway, after the initial shock of the police visit, I made the decision that had been simmering in my mind since the confrontation. I would press charges. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about respect, boundaries, and proving that my parents' favoritism and disregard had consequences. I filled out the necessary forms, detailing every interaction, every dismissive comment, every calculated act that had led to this moment. As I handed the paperwork to the officer, I saw the disbelief in my parents' eyes, their earlier arrogance replaced with a pale and settled tension. For years, they had treated me as the invisible child, the one whose achievements and feelings could be ignored. Now, the tables had turned. I felt a surge of satisfaction, a deep sense of karmic balance, knowing that their casual dismissal would no longer shield them from accountability. Thoughts of their smug smiles, the way they had flaunted favoritism, replayed vividly, and each memory intensified the sense of vindication swelling inside me. I imagined the conversation they would have with friends and family, the whispers, the judgment, and the realization that the person they had underestimated had finally asserted power. Standing there, completing the paperwork, I felt a clarity I hadn't known before, a mix of relief, empowerment, and quiet triumph. The weight of years of being overlooked lifted, replaced by a certainty that I had finally reclaimed my dignity. Pressing charges wasn't just a legal step. It was a statement, a turning point, and a personal victory that reshaped the balance of our family dynamic forever. Word spread faster than I expected. By the next day, relatives and neighbors were whispering, and I could feel their eyes on my parents whenever they left the house. Suddenly, the favoritism and hypocrisy that had been hidden for years were exposed, no longer confined to the quiet corners of our home. I started receiving messages of support from friends and even distant relatives who had noticed the patterns, but never spoken up. Their words encouraging, validating, and empathetic lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Meanwhile, my parents' composure crumbled under the subtle but unmistakable judgment around them. They tried to brush off questions, but the cracks in their facade were impossible to hide. "We just didn't think it was a big deal," my mother muttered weakly when confronted by a cousin, her usual confidence gone. I watched them squirm, realizing that for the first time, they were facing the emotional consequences of their actions publicly. It felt surreal, this reversal of status. The same people who had dismissed me and my accomplishments were now shrinking under scrutiny. Inside, I felt a mix of vindication and cautious relief, understanding that justice wasn't just about legal action. It was about accountability, exposure, and finally being seen. The support from peers and the uncomfortable reactions of my parents merged into a quiet triumph, a testament that the truth, once revealed, could no longer be ignored. I felt stronger, validated, and for the first time in years, untouchable. Just when I thought the storm had passed, a revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. My sister, the one I had assumed was an innocent bystander in all of this, had known about my parents' plan all along. She had seen the way they plotted, how they justified taking my car, and instead of speaking up, she had stayed silent, covering for them, protecting their image, while I bore the humiliation. The realization left me reeling. Part of me burned with betrayal. I had trusted her, even in small ways, and she had chosen loyalty to my parents over me. But alongside the anger was a strange relief. At least now, I had the truth, and I could understand the full scope of the manipulation. This second power reversal shifted everything. My sister, whom I had once seen as just another pawn, was now implicated in the deception, and the balance of accountability broadened. The dynamics I thought I understood were shattered, forcing me to confront not just my parents, but the entire system of favoritism that had suffocated me for years. My mind raced, piecing together all the little hints I had ignored, the subtle smiles, the empty reassurances, the moments that now made sense in retrospect. It was like stepping into a mirror of betrayal, seeing both familiar faces twisted by deceit, yet finally understanding the true depth of their underestimation. The weight of the truth pressed down on me, but beneath it lay a flicker of exhilaration. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was entangling a web of lies and reclaiming clarity that had been stolen from me for far too long. The day I reclaimed my car felt surreal, like stepping into a new reality I had fought hard to create. I walked into the driveway, keys in hand, and for the first time in years, I felt completely in control of my space, my possessions, and my dignity. When my parents approached, I didn't hesitate or flinch. I calmly, firmly stated my boundaries, making it clear that my efforts and achievements would no longer be treated as trivial. I could see the surprise in their eyes, the recognition that their usual tactics of dismissal no longer worked. The air between us shifted, a subtle but undeniable change as they realized I would no longer be underestimated or ignored. Inside, I felt a deep sense of growth and resilience. The months of frustration, planning, and careful documentation had forged a version of myself that could stand strong even against those who had once held power over me. FOMO and the tension of always feeling like the lesser child dissolved, replaced by a quiet confidence and a renewed understanding of my worth. Every step I took, every calm word I spoke, reinforced the empowerment I had been seeking for so long. I realized that reclaiming my car wasn't just about the physical object. It was a declaration that I would no longer accept favoritism, injustice, or neglect. The respect I now commanded wasn't demanded through anger or threats. It was earned through patience, planning, and unwavering self-belief. For the first time, I felt truly seen, validated, and untouchable in my own right. Sitting alone in my car that evening, I let myself finally breathe. The engine's hum was no longer a symbol of theft or humiliation, but of victory, of boundaries restored and justice served. I reflected on everything: the anger that had burned inside me, the frustration at years of favoritism, the careful planning that led to reclaiming what was mine. I thought about my parents and my sister, about how fragile their pride had been when confronted with truth and accountability. Part of me felt sorrow for the relationships I had known and loved, now strained by confrontation and exposure. But that grief was tempered by relief. I was no longer trapped in silence or in their shadow. Every pang of resentment and every sleepless night spent imagining how I could reclaim control had culminated in this moment of clarity and empowerment. I realized that moral vindication wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoring balance, reclaiming self-worth, and being seen as I deserved to be. My heart felt lighter knowing that I had acted with integrity, that I had stood up not just for myself, but for the principle that effort, respect, and honesty should never be dismissed. The world might still see my family in one light, but I knew the truth, and that knowledge brought a quiet, unshakable strength. As I drove away into the evening, I felt a catharsis unlike anything I had expected, a mixture of sorrow, triumph, and liberation that settled deep into my chest. This journey had taken everything I had: patience, courage, and resilience, but it had given me back something far more precious: my voice, my dignity, and the unwavering knowledge that I would never allow anyone to undermine me again.